Hello, my name is Nova, and my sister tied an anchor to my leg and pushed me into the sea, just so she could take everything our father left behind. They planned it together, called it a family trip, laughed over champagne while I sank, and when they got home, they held a funeral, toasted to my death, and erased my face from every photo like I never existed. But what if I told you I didn't drown? What if I told you I watched them celebrate before I walked back into the room they thought I'd buried me from? Would you still call it a family? The evening air in Coral Gables always smelled like cut grass and quiet tension. That night, it clung heavier than usual as I stepped out of my car, heels clicking softly against the long driveway lined with lanterns and lemon trees. The house hadn't changed. Spanish-style arches, the same ivy creeping up the columns, like the place was too proud to age. I adjusted the neckline of my dress and took a breath before pushing through the double doors. Inside, the laughter had already started, the kind that belonged to people who'd never been forced to work for anything. Glasses clinked. Music from an old jazz playlist trickled through ceiling speakers. Everyone had taken their seats around the polished mahogany table that stretched almost the length of the room. Almost everyone. Mine was still empty. The only one at the farthest end, shoved up against the window, where the air conditioning never reached. The backrest was cracked. When I pulled it out, it wobbled. I sat anyway. I always sat anyway. "Hey, could you bring out some more wine for this side?" Someone called down the table, waving in my direction. It was Ricky, Isolde's latest fiancé, or maybe just her date. I didn't correct him. I didn't answer. He'd mistaken me for the help, and Isolde didn't say a word. She just gave that kind of smirk that only sisters can perfect, part condescension, part victory lap. I didn't meet her eyes. Instead, I looked down at the gold-rimmed plate in front of me, sitting on a charger I'd picked out 5 years ago for our parents' anniversary. That was the problem with building everything for a family that didn't value you. Eventually, you'd decorate the space they erased you from. I shifted in the chair. The leg wobbled again. "Nova," Vera said from mid-table, her voice loud enough to slice through the clatter. "You're unusually quiet tonight." I smiled thinly, just taking it all in. Truthfully, I hadn't expected to be invited at all. Not since Dad passed. Not since Isolde had somehow taken control of everything. The family business, the house, the attention. Tonight was labeled a heritage dinner, whatever that meant. Maybe it was just another excuse to gather and drink and remind me I was expendable. When dessert was cleared and the wine flowed heavier, Vera stood up, her voice suddenly poised and deliberate. "Before we end the night," she began, glancing toward Isolde, "I wanted to address something important regarding the estate." A hush settled. Knives clinked against plates. I straightened in my seat. Isolde, wearing her usual black-on-black power dress, rose just enough to pull out a folder from her clutch. "This won't take long," she said, unfolding the document. "Just a matter of clarity for everyone here." I watched her hands, manicured, sharp, as she slid a copy across the table toward me. It was a legal document. My name was there. Then crossed out. I blinked. My throat tightened. "This shows Nova signed away her claim years ago," Isolde said, matter of fact. "So for any future discussions about the company or the estate, this just clears the air. I didn't remember signing anything like that." "Are you serious?" I managed to say, my voice lower than I intended. "You signed it in 2018, Vera added quickly, eyes already moving on to the next topic. "It's done." "No," I said, louder. "I didn't. I've never—" "Please," Vera cut in, her smile tired and practiced. "Let's not ruin the evening with dramatics." My hand clenched the tablecloth. I stared at the signature. It was almost mine. Not quite. Off by the slope of the R, the tail of the A. But they'd gone through the effort of forging it and making it believable. Everyone else at the table turned back to their wine. A few looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke. Louis was there, seated at the far edge, invited under the pretense of being a longtime family friend and business contact. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw what I needed. Doubt. Alarm. He didn't believe them either. But he didn't speak either. I wanted to stand up, to scream, to say, I built half the properties with you. I was there when Dad wanted to pull out of Miami. I redesigned the flagship tower downtown. I pulled this family out of financial ruin when Isolde was on a yacht in Croatia. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I picked up my glass, smiled, sipped. I thought about the nights I'd fallen asleep at my desk, the time I took out a personal loan to cover payroll, how I'd quietly canceled a vacation to Hawaii when the books came up short one year. All those moments, invisible now. All that remained was a broken chair and a forged signature. Isolde leaned toward Vera and whispered something. They laughed. I swallowed hard. Was this what family had come to? A dinner where I was seated near the window like an afterthought, with a name removed from a paper so carefully it felt like a eulogy. I looked down the table, at the gleaming wine glasses, the heirloom silverware, the centerpiece I'd designed 3 years ago. And then I looked at them. They were laughing. My voice, my blood, my years, they meant nothing. But I would not give them the satisfaction of watching me break. Not tonight. That's the thing about shadows. You don't notice them until the light changes. And I was done standing in theirs. I never went back to my room that night. Not right away. After the dinner, after they humiliated me, I walked up the staircase as if I were just another tired guest, smiling, nodding, waving at someone who barely looked my way. But instead of retreating behind the door I was given, no longer the one I used to call mine, I kept walking. My heels clicked softly against the floor, each step quieter than the one before. The house, now dimmed and hushed, looked different in the dark. As I moved through the halls, I passed the same family portraits that used to make me feel proud. But that night, they seemed to glare. They favored Isolde, always did, her face centered, framed perfectly. Mine, either cropped, pushed to the side, or missing altogether. It was subtle, but that's how erasure works. Not all at once, bit by bit. The hallway near the study was half lit by a lamp Vera always insisted on keeping turned on. To give the house warmth, she used to say. I paused there for a second, just enough to listen. And that's when I heard it. 2 voices, low, clipped, unmistakably sharp, filtering through the cracked study door. I've already swapped it, Isolde said. Her voice had that smug undertone she never really hid, the one she wore like perfume. The original's back in his chest. Once the fake goes through, she's finished. There was a pause. Then Vera spoke, her tone tighter, but no less cruel. Are you sure she won't remember signing anything? She won't, because she never did. That's the beauty of it. My fingers curled into fists at my side. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Through the gap, I could see them. Isolde in her silk robe, lounging like she owned the place. Vera stood near the desk, holding the manila envelope I had spotted once before, the one she'd told me contained old family documents. It wasn't just forged signatures anymore. It was premeditated, planned, cold. I knew that lawyer too, younger guy, always hovering around Isolde at events. She had him in her pocket. He wasn't just stamping papers, he was rewriting my history and getting paid for it. I wanted to walk in and throw the door open. Ask how they could do this. Ask if this was what Dad would have wanted. Ask if it made them feel powerful to erase their own blood. But I didn't. Not because I was weak. Because I knew it wasn't time. Because silence. Silence lets the enemy speak more than they realize. I took a slow step back from the door, my breath tight in my chest. As I turned to leave, I bumped into someone. Whoa, Louis said, startled. I pressed a finger to my lips. He froze. His eyes searched mine, and I knew he could see it. The flush in my cheeks, the tremble I was trying to hide. You look like you've seen a ghost, he whispered. I shook my head. Worse. I've seen the living. His expression shifted. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Louis was one of the few people in that house who had ever seen me show up at 5 a.m. with plans rolled under my arm, working on remodels no one else cared about. He had been there when I quietly paid staff out of pocket to avoid layoffs. He knew. And he just nodded and stepped aside, I didn't go straight to bed, not yet. I needed space. I walked outside, barefoot, the stone cold against my skin. The night had settled heavy over the estate, still, quiet, deceptive, a place where secrets could breathe. I sat near the koi pond, watching the water ripple under the moonlight. My father's old garden, the one he used to tend with me on weekends, now overgrown, neglected, like everything else that wasn't shiny enough for Isolde's taste. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened my voice memos app, and recorded a single line. They've replaced the will. They forged my name. I have no paper, no power, but I have memory. Then I walked back inside, up the stairs, past the portraits, back into the room they gave me. I shut the door gently behind me, locked it. I sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like an hour, staring at nothing. My legs still buzzed from the tension, but my mind was razor sharp. The worst part of betrayal isn't the lie. It's the moment you realize how many people knew the truth and stayed quiet. I glanced at the nightstand. There, in an old silver frame, was the last photo I had of me and Dad before his health turned. I picked it up. He was smiling, hand on my shoulder. Not Isolde's, mine. He used to call me the builder, not for the job, but for what I did when everything around us broke. I built bridges. I built peace. I built things no one else wanted to fix, and they wanted to write me out of everything he left behind. I touched the frame, whispering the words I hadn't said out loud until then. If they want me gone, they're going to have to bury me for real. That night, I didn't cry. I planned. I never thought death would come so soon, and it came with a smile. The kind of smile I used to believe meant comfort, the kind sisters give in stories right before pulling you in for a hug. But on that boat, under the moon, Isolde's smile was sharp. Not comforting, confirming. We had set out earlier that afternoon. It was Isolde's idea, of course. A little family celebration, she'd said, as if our dinner 2 nights ago hadn't already been her victory parade. The plan was to sail out into the waters off the Keys, toast to Dad's memory, and according to her, symbolically let go of the past. She'd even made it sound like it was for me. Nova's been under a lot of pressure lately, she told the rest of them at brunch as I walked into the kitchen just in time to hear it. Maybe a little salt air will help her see things more clearly. I should have known. The way she phrased things was always layered. We boarded the yacht around 4, the usual crew in place, same boat we used for corporate weekends and donor parties. Everything about it was polished, prepped, and performative. The sun had already dipped behind some light clouds, casting everything in that soft, cinematic light Florida evenings always managed to conjure. I stayed near the railing the entire trip, my back to them, nursing a glass of Pinot that didn't taste like anything. Maybe I was hoping to find a moment of peace. Maybe I wanted the breeze to scrub away the tension I hadn't been able to shake since discovering what they'd done. But the wind only made me colder. Maybe I was a fool to believe I ever belonged, I whispered. The water below shimmered like glass. Somewhere behind me, laughter bounced off the deck's teak floorboards. Vera's voice rose above the others, retelling some tired story that painted her as the victim of yet another misinterpreted comment. I stood still, trying to feel invisible again, just long enough to think. Then I heard soft footsteps. Nova. I turned slowly. Isolde stood barefoot, her dress fluttering slightly from the breeze. She held a half-empty glass of rosé and smiled, like this was just another vacation moment, like we were girls again, 10 and 12, stealing candy from Grandma's pantry and swearing not to tell. You okay? She asked. I nodded slowly. Just needed air. She stepped beside me and pulled the shawl off her shoulders, draping it across mine without waiting for a yes. I didn't move. I couldn't. It's a nice night, she said, looking out at the water. Dad always loved being out here. I said nothing. I didn't trust my voice not to shake. She took a sip from her glass. You always take things too seriously. You know that? I finally turned to her, searching for the real meaning behind her tone. Is that what you think? She shrugged. You hold on too tight. Sometimes it's better to just let go. Her words hung in the air like mist. I looked at her hand, the one resting so casually on the railing. Perfect manicure, no tremble, no hint of hesitation. I know what you did, I said, barely above a whisper. For a second, her expression faltered, but only for a second. Did what? She asked, her voice like silk soaked in ice. I shook my head. You don't have to pretend. She set her glass down on the side table, then knelt down slightly, pretending to fuss with the hem of my dress near my ankle. I felt it before I saw it. The thick, deliberate tug around my leg. Something cold, something heavy. What are you? I started, stepping back. But it was too late. She looked up at me. Her smile widened. You've always been the weight dragging us down, she whispered. Let me set you free. I gasped, and then she pushed. The railing hit my lower back, knocking the breath out of me. The sea didn't feel like water. It felt like impact, hard, crushing, cold. Then it went dark. I didn't scream. There wasn't time, just a rush of bubbles and the sensation of being dragged. The anchor. She'd tied an anchor to me. I kicked instinctively, but the rope around my ankle held fast. My body twisted as I sank, the weight pulling me down, deeper, faster than I could resist. Salt stung my eyes. My mouth opened before I could stop it. Water surged in. Panic turned into a blur of images. Her face above me, the moonlit deck, the broken chair from dinner, my father's photo, the documents, the forged signature. Everything I built, every moment I swallowed my pride. Gone. My lungs begged for air, but all I could do was claw at the rope. I tried to remember how many knots she'd tied, if I could reach it, if I could even see straight. But my body wasn't listening anymore. My thoughts slowed. Everything sounded far away, muted, like underwater radio static. Is this how it ends? Erased without a scream. I stopped kicking, and that's when it hit me. This couldn't be it. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about refusal. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Not like this. In the silence, somewhere between drowning and surrender, I saw his face. My father, his hand on my shoulder, his voice like a steady drumbeat in my chest. You are the one who builds. Don't let them tear you down. I clenched my fists. Something in me, something deep, something primal, snapped into focus. I wasn't ready to die. I wouldn't let them erase me. Not now. Not ever. And so, I fought. When I clawed my way back to the surface, gasping salt and rage, I knew survival was no accident. It was defiance. I broke through the water with a soundless scream, arms flailing against the weight pulling me down. The anchor still tugged at my ankle, but I'd managed to loosen the knot just enough for my foot to slide free. It had taken every last ounce of air, every memory of my father's voice urging me to fight, every shred of the woman I used to be. My lungs screamed as I pulled myself onto a plank floating nearby, likely part of a supply crate that had slipped from the yacht's deck. The stars above were quiet, watching. I lay there, half dead, half born again, the salt water burning my throat, my vision blurred. I couldn't tell how long I floated. Minutes, maybe more. My limbs ached. The pain was deep and dull, the kind that settled into your bones and waited. But I was alive. The current had carried me far enough from the yacht to leave it behind, but not so far that the shoreline was unreachable. I scanned the horizon, still struggling to keep my head up, the wooden plank barely supporting my weight. Somewhere in the distance, a soft glow shimmered across the water. It wasn't the moon. It was a boat. A small one, moving slowly. I tried to wave but nearly slipped off the board, so I shouted, or tried to. It came out more like a hoarse rasp than anything resembling speech. Then the light shifted, angled toward me. A voice, deep, unfamiliar, called out in Spanish. ¿Quién está ahí? I tried again, louder this time. Here, please. Another moment passed. The boat turned. I heard the engine hum slightly louder as it approached. A flashlight swept across the water, then stilled. Dios mío, the man gasped. Hold on. I didn't have to hold on for long. The man, broad-shouldered, middle-aged, with sea-worn hands, grabbed me under the arms and pulled me onto his boat like I weighed nothing at all. I collapsed onto the deck, coughing water, limbs trembling, chest heaving. He dropped a thick wool blanket over my shoulders and pressed a warm thermos into my hands. "Drink," he said softly. His accent was Cuban, the kind I'd grown up around. Comforting, unpretentious. I took a sip. It was coffee, strong, sweet, laced with something that steadied my shaking. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't ask what I was doing floating in the middle of the ocean in a dress. He just let me breathe. The boat kept moving at a steady pace toward the mainland, the lights of Miami beginning to sharpen in the distance. I leaned against the side rail, trying to piece together what had just happened, what it meant, and more terrifying, what came next. "Why'd you save me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. The man looked at me, then turned back toward the water. "Because you're not done yet," he said. "People like you, who don't drown, they still got work to do." His words landed somewhere deep in my chest. "Name's Hector," he added after a pause. "Fish, mostly. Grouper, some snapper, sometimes people." I managed a weak smile. He didn't press for details. That's the thing about men like Hector. Life teaches them that some stories need time to be told, and some don't need telling at all. We docked just before dawn at a small marina tucked behind a line of shuttered bait shops and boat repair shacks. Hector offered to call someone, but I shook my head. "I've got it from here." He nodded. "You sure?" I was more sure than I'd ever been. I walked barefoot along the dock, blankets still draped around my shoulders. The city was just waking, garbage trucks rumbling, coffee shops opening their doors. Nobody looked twice at me. That was the beauty of Miami. It could be brutally honest and completely indifferent all at once. I made my way to Little Havana, back to a place I hadn't stepped foot in for nearly a decade. Lewis's Cafe stood at the corner, just as I remembered. Faded paint, the same cracked tile out front, smelled like fresh bread and strong espresso. I knocked twice on the side door. No one answered. I knocked again, harder. A moment later, the door creaked open. Lewis stared at me like he was looking at a ghost. "Nova?" His voice caught. "I need a place," I said, "just for a little while." He didn't ask. He stepped aside. The room upstairs hadn't changed. Small twin bed, old ceiling fan, a sink in the corner. No frills, just quiet, just safe. I sat on the edge of the bed, blankets still tight around me. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was calm, too calm maybe. The kind of calm that comes after you've been swallowed by something and spit back out. That calm is dangerous. It doesn't scream. It watches. It waits. I opened my phone, miraculously still functional, and deleted every text I'd ever sent to Isolde. Then I pulled out a notebook from the drawer beside the bed and started writing. Not thoughts, steps. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. They tried to erase me. Now I'd erase their certainty. One move at a time. I still had the name. I still had the knowledge. And thanks to Hector, I still had breath. I didn't know when they'd find out I was alive. I didn't care, because when they did, it would already be too late. I watched from the darkened window as they laughed at my death and toasted to their victory. The old sycamore outside the dining room still stood tall, its branches brushing against the glass, swaying slightly with the coastal breeze. I had crouched beneath it dozens of times as a kid, hiding from chores, from Vera's lectures, from Isolde's smug corrections. Now it gave me cover as I peered through the sheer drapes and into the home that once had my fingerprints on every wall. Inside, they were dressed in black, mourning colors, but the atmosphere was anything but somber. A jazz trio played in the corner. Champagne flowed like it was New Year's Eve. The caterers we used for weddings and launch events were handing out seared scallops and mini beef Wellingtons. A long buffet table was lined with gold-rimmed platters. In the center stood a single-framed photo. Me. The one from my college graduation. The only version of me they still liked. Before I became a threat. I expected mourning, I whispered to myself. Instead, I found celebration. This wasn't grief. This was relief. They were glad I was gone. Isolde, in a fitted black dress that looked more like a cocktail number than funeral attire, raised her glass. "To freedom," she said, her voice clear and confident, "and to the empire we now control." Applause broke out. Real applause. Vera, ever the strategist, leaned over to whisper something into the ear of a man I didn't recognize. She was smiling, calm, like she'd just sealed a deal at a charity gala. "Poor Nova," she said, just loud enough for a few to hear. "But this is for the best." I gripped the window frame tighter. My hands were shaking again, not from fear, but from restraint. I scanned the crowd, board members, extended cousins, employees who'd once sent me holiday cards. Even Louis's cousin was there, though Louis himself was nowhere in sight. He'd probably sensed something was wrong. What chilled me the most wasn't the performance, it was how rehearsed it felt, like they'd been waiting for this moment. My disappearance had simply cleared the way. Then I saw it. On the wall above the fireplace was the large family portrait we'd taken 5 years ago at Dad's last birthday. We'd all been there, all 5 of us. But now my face had been cut out, not blurred, not faded, cut out, clean, precise, replaced with a background patch of trees and patio bricks. Even in death, they couldn't let me exist. I stepped back, my chest burning. I'd come here to see with my own eyes, to confirm the depth of their betrayal. But this was deeper than I imagined. They hadn't just buried me, they'd deleted me, every sacrifice I'd made, every sleepless night, every building I'd helped design, every contract I renegotiated when the company was circling bankruptcy, all of it, rewritten, retold, reassigned, and I was the ghost. I clenched my fists and leaned against the tree trunk, steadying my breath. "Nova was always too emotional," I imagined Isolde saying. "She wasn't built for leadership." Or Vera, sipping her second glass of champagne. "We tried to help her, but she kept resisting. You know how some people are, they can't get out of their own way." That was the narrative they were spinning now, the tragedy of a troubled youngest sister, a cautionary tale wrapped in white roses and well-timed eulogies. I wasn't angry anymore. I was past that. What I felt was precise, focused, cold. They wanted me gone. They wanted me invisible. But I would show them the power of a ghost. I backed away from the window and moved along the side of the house, keeping low, my footsteps light on the stone path. I slipped into the gardener's shed, still unlocked, and waited. I needed darkness. I needed time. The house was crawling with people. I would return later, when the guests were gone and the show was over. And hours passed. The music faded. Car engines rumbled, then dwindled to silence. One by one, the porch lights clicked off. By midnight, the house was still. I moved through the side entrance, the code on the old security panel still the same. Dad's birthday. They hadn't even bothered to change it. Inside, the air smelled like leftover food and expensive perfume. I walked through the dining room slowly, my eyes scanning every surface. Empty glasses. A crumpled napkin with a lipstick smear. A printed program for the Celebration of Life service, complete with a eulogy Isolde had written herself. I picked it up and read the first line. Nova was a dreamer. I almost laughed. In the corner, near the fireplace, the portrait remained, my face still absent. I stared at it for a long time. Then I whispered, "They buried the wrong sister." The house was mine again, even if only for a few minutes. I moved silently through the rooms, noting the small changes Isolde had made. New art, different throws, plants where Dad's old records used to sit. She hadn't preserved the home, she'd branded it. But that would change. From that night on, every smile they wore would be recorded and turned against them. I began with silence, slipping through their rooms like a shadow, gathering proof of every lie. After the funeral party faded into whispers and sleep, I waited just long enough to be sure. Around 2:30 a.m., the lights in the upstairs bedrooms had finally gone dark, one by one. The last to flicker off was Isolde's, naturally. She always needed to be the last one seen, even in her own home. I was already inside by then. The side entrance through the mudroom still hadn't been recoded. It was the same keypad I designed when we renovated the estate, a detail Isolde had probably forgotten. Or maybe she simply didn't consider I'd ever come back. This was still my home, even if they pretended I never lived here. The air inside was heavy with perfume and burnt wax. Trays of half-eaten hors d'oeuvres sat untouched on the dining table. Glasses with lipstick-stained rims littered the coffee table. Someone had left their heels on the staircase landing. I moved quietly, but not cautiously. I knew every floorboard, every hinge that creaked, every vent that echoed voices from room to room. I designed half of it, after all. I started in Dad's study. The lamp on his old desk still gave off that faint smell of warm paper. It was where I'd learned to draft my first blueprint, where he let me stay up late tracing city maps, pretending I was a real architect before I'd even finished high school. The room had changed. Isolde had replaced most of the decor, but she hadn't touched the filing cabinets. Third drawer down on the left, his private files. Inside, invoices, old contracts, copies of donation receipts. My name was on dozens of them, even one where I'd personally transferred funds to cover emergency payroll the year the market crashed. No one had known but him. I took photos of everything with my burner phone. Next, the safe. It was newer, Isolde's edition, but she'd written the code in her planner once. I remembered the number because it was the anniversary of one of her award ceremonies. Typical. Inside the safe, a folder marked Succession Planning. The contents? Legal documents, most recently updated just a year before Dad passed. There was my name, listed first, co-signatory on multiple trusts, a breakdown of ownership in the company. None of that was in the paperwork Isolde had waved around at dinner. I scanned, photographed, then carefully placed everything back in place. Nothing disturbed. No trace. As I moved back into the hallway, I passed the guest bathroom and heard muffled voices coming from the kitchen. I paused. 2 people, laughing, drunk. I crept closer, staying low by the staircase. She would have dragged us down forever, Vera said, her tone slurred but gleeful. Thank God Isolde had the guts to make it happen. Oh, come on, the man replied. I didn't recognize him. You really believe she's dead? Vera let out a small chuckle. Darling, please, no one survives that. I recorded the whole thing. In the living room, I found the financial ledger they used for board meetings. It had been hastily tucked under a pile of mail. I opened it and flipped through pages. Several entries were backdated, fund transfers labeled as emergency restructuring. I recognized the name of the shell company, one Isolde had set up years ago when she was trying to hide a luxury condo purchase. She wasn't just rewriting family history, she was laundering it. Keep talking, I whispered silently. In the center of the living room, the champagne cart still stood. 3 bottles half empty, scattered napkins. Someone had written Nova's Legacy on a cocktail menu and crossed it out, replacing it with Fresh Start. I took a photo of that too. At the far end of the room, I saw Dad's old pen, the Mont Blanc he'd used for every major signature of his life. It had been missing since the reading of the will. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand. They thought silence meant weakness, but silence is a ledger, and I was writing their debt. I made my way back out, through the back gate that led to the side alley, careful not to disturb the security cameras, which were still pointed too high thanks to a poor installation job I'd noted during a previous visit. The last thing I needed was a digital trail. A block away, I changed out of the dark hoodie and shoes I wore into more neutral clothes I'd stashed earlier. I called a rideshare under a fake name and had them drop me a few blocks from Louis' cafe. When I arrived, the street was quiet. The neon sign flickered like it always had, casting a dim glow on the sidewalk. I knocked once. Firm, intentional. Louis opened the side door, eyes wide. You okay? He asked. I nodded. I need the back office, just for a bit. He stepped aside without a word. I spread out the photos, audio clips, and documents across the table. It looked like chaos, but I saw patterns. I saw the cracks in their foundation. I saw proof. Louis brought me a cup of coffee. No words, just support. I looked at the wall clock. Nearly 5 a.m. When the time comes, I said quietly, their own words will bury them. I uploaded everything to a secured cloud drive, backups in 3 places, encrypted folders labeled innocuously, a copy on a flash drive hidden in a place no one would ever look, behind Dad's old drafting board in a storage unit registered under a company name they never knew existed. This wasn't revenge, it was insurance. They buried me once. I wouldn't give them a second chance. And that time was closer than they could imagine. It began with a single meeting. The day I walked back into the room, they were certain I'd never enter again. The Miami sky was still wrapped in a layer of early morning haze when I stepped onto the sidewalk outside the law firm's downtown office. The city was just starting to stir. Traffic whispered down the streets, the hiss of bus brakes and the hum of distant voices marking the slow start of another day. People moved with purpose, coffee cups in hand, phones pressed to ears, their lives pressing forward as if nothing had shifted in the world. But for me, everything had. In that moment, it felt like time had stretched, holding its breath just long enough for me to take one last look at the city that had swallowed me whole, and now was about to witness my return. I adjusted the sleeves of the slate-gray blazer I'd borrowed from Lewis's office closet. It didn't quite feel like me, too stiff, too corporate, but it looked the part. And that's what mattered. I needed to look like someone who belonged at the head of the table, not a woman clawing her way back from beneath the dirt they'd tried to bury her under. They wrote my absence into paperwork, signed away my legacy with ink and cold smiles. Today, I came back with something stronger. The truth. The elevator was slow and silent, the kind of hush that magnified everything. I could hear the elevator motor humming, the soft shuffle of my shoes, the slow, steady beat of my own heart. 15th floor. The doors opened with a chime. At the reception desk, a woman I didn't recognize glanced up and offered a polite smile, until I gave her my name. "Nova?" she said, straightening halfway out of her seat, color draining from her face. "But they said—" I didn't stop to correct her. I just kept walking, down the long hallway lined with black and white art prints and glass doors, toward the main conference room. My steps were measured. I didn't rush, didn't hesitate. The doors to the conference room were closed. I didn't knock. I opened them. The conversation died mid-sentence. At the head of the table sat Isolde, dressed in tailored navy, her posture as impeccable as ever. She'd been mid-laugh, her mouth frozen in a shape that no longer fit the moment. Vera sat beside her, thumbing a Mont Blanc pen between manicured fingers. Around them were 3 lawyers, one older man I vaguely remembered as Kevin, and 2 associates with open laptops and guarded eyes. Every face in the room turned toward me. Shock. Confusion. Dread. Isolde's voice faltered. This isn't possible." I stepped fully into the room, letting the door close behind me. "You should know by now," I said. "I don't sink." A beat of silence. A breath. I crossed the room and stopped at the far end of the table, opposite Isolde. I didn't sit. Instead, I placed a single leather folder on the polished surface. No one moved. Kevin leaned back slightly, his hands tented as he tried to mask the sudden shift in the room's center of gravity. "I believe you were about to finalize control of the estate," I said. My voice was calm, even. "Wouldn't want to interrupt." Isolde blinked, her perfect mask already beginning to crack. "This meeting isn't open to people who are alive?" I said, cutting her off. "Yes, I can see how that might be inconvenient." Vera stared at me like she was seeing an apparition. Her lipstick, normally flawless, had smudged slightly at the corner. A small detail, but revealing. I reached into the folder and pulled out a document. The pages were thick, cream-colored, marked with familiar signatures and an embossed seal. "This is the original will," I said, sliding it across the table toward Kevin. "With my father's signature, his seal, notarized, filed, never revoked." Twist S17 had officially been played. The room froze. Kevin glanced at the document, eyes narrowing as he scanned the first page. One of the associates pulled out her phone and began typing furiously, probably verifying case numbers and notary records. Murmured phrases passed quietly between the lawyers. Isolde didn't speak. I watched her face, calculating. She was trying to find a way out. to rewrite the narrative before it landed. She'd always been good at that. But this time, the script had been stolen from her hands. "This doesn't prove anything," she said finally, her voice strained. "Anyone could forge—" "You're right," I interrupted smoothly. "Which is why I brought something else." I placed a small black flash drive onto the table. It looked innocuous, but everyone in the room stared at it like it might detonate. "May I?" I asked, already moving toward the wall-mounted screen. No one answered. They didn't have to. I plugged in the drive. The first audio clip began immediately. Isolde's voice, crisp and unmistakable. "Once she's gone, the empire is ours." Gasps. A ripple of tension. Then Vera's voice, faintly slurred from wine, murmuring, "Poor Nova. But this is for the best." Finally, a conversation between Vera and one of the attorneys. Candid, careless, arrogant. Discussing how the false documents had been rushed, how Isolde had promised a cut of the shares if everything went through. Twist S18 had landed. Hard. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. Their silence was louder than their denial had ever been. When the clip ended, the screen went dark. I removed the drive, pocketed it, and turned back to the table. "You can question my presence," I said quietly. "You can question my intentions, but you can no longer question the truth. It's documented, it's preserved, and it's legally binding." Kevin cleared his throat. "We'll need a recess." "Take your time," I replied. "I'm not going anywhere." Isolde shoved back her chair suddenly. It scraped loudly against the floor. "You think this ends with documents?" she snapped. "You have no idea what you've started." I turned to her. "No," I said, "but I know what you ended. Because tomorrow, the empire they stole, built on forged papers, manipulated trust, and silence, would begin to collapse under the weight of truth. And this time, it would be documented." The next morning, the boardroom was no longer theirs. It was mine. I stood near the head of the long table where Isolde had once claimed her seat with effortless arrogance. That morning, her nameplate was gone, her laptop removed, and the chair she used to lean back in as if she ran the city sat empty. There was no need to announce the shift. Everyone in that room knew. Across from me, the senior partners of the firm who'd once signed off on Isolde's forged documents shuffled through the judge's written order. They avoided my gaze. Good. They should have. The court's decision had come swiftly. It hadn't needed much deliberation. The will I'd presented was airtight, stamped, notarized, registered. My father's seal still intact, and the recordings, well, those didn't leave room for interpretation. The judge had glanced over the forged version with all the interest one gives to a discarded napkin before declaring it void. "They thought signatures could bury me," I'd said in my closing statement. "Today, signatures brought me back." Now here I was, back, the estate, the company, the name, all restored, not handed to me, not gifted, taken back. Twist S19 had landed, and no one could unring that bell. As I walked out of the boardroom, I passed Kevin, the firm's senior counsel, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 24 hours. He opened his mouth to say something, probably an apology, but I gave him nothing. Let silence speak for me, as it always had. From downtown, I drove straight to Coral Gables. The closer I got, the quieter everything felt. No more nerves, just stillness. My thoughts had settled into something clear, steady. I wasn't here for gloating. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to reclaim what never should have been stolen. When I pulled up to the estate, a black SUV sat in the driveway, unfamiliar plates, a moving service. Professional, fast, efficient, perfect. Inside, Isolde and Vera were packing, or rather, watching others do it for them. Vera was seated on the stairs, her phone clutched tightly in one hand, muttering to someone on speaker about unjust rulings and legal retaliation. Her lipstick was smudged again, but this time she wasn't hiding it. Her words were sharp, but her tone betrayed the panic behind them. Isolde was in the sunroom, Dad's sunroom, snapping orders at two movers who barely acknowledged her. I said wrap the marble sculpture properly, not dump it in a box like cheap tchotchkes, she snapped. That's not yours, I said from the doorway. She froze, then turned slowly. Oh, look. The resurrection. I hope your boxes are labeled. I'd hate for you to forget which ones are filled with things you never earned. Twist S20 was in motion now. I'll sue, she said, eyes narrowing. Defamation, emotional trauma. You'll wish. I already did, I cut in. But now I'm awake, and I'm home. Her face twitched. She opened her mouth again, but nothing useful came out. The legal officers accompanying me stepped forward. One handed her a printed notice outlining the transition of ownership and the immediate transfer of property. She took it like it burned her fingers. They had 24 hours to vacate. I gave them 2. As they gathered what they could, designer bags, framed awards, silk scarves they hadn't worn in years, neighbors began to take notice. Some peeked from behind hedges. Others stood with arms crossed on driveways. No one waved. That's the woman who betrayed her own sister, someone muttered. Look at her now. Nothing left. Vera turned her face away, clutching her sunglasses like they were armor. Isolde straightened her shoulders, refusing to look back as she stepped into the SUV. But the twitch at her temple betrayed her. The doors shut. The car rolled down the drive. And just like that, the empire they stole crumbled behind them. The mansion that had once been filled with champagne laughter and orchestrated elegance now echoed with quiet, not emptiness, just truth. I walked through the foyer slowly, running my fingers along the banister I'd refinished myself one summer when we couldn't afford contractors. Upstairs, I passed rooms where I used to draft blueprints while the rest of the family vacationed in Italy. In the sitting room, I stopped. The portrait, our family photo, still hung above the fireplace, my face still cut out. I stood there for a long moment, then reached into my bag and pulled out the original, uncut, untouched. I had kept it safe all these years, tucked between journals, waiting. I removed the damaged frame, set it aside, and replaced it with the real one. No ceremony, just a quiet, deliberate correction. I looked up at it and felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Not joy, not vengeance, just resolution. I didn't need to shout, I whispered. Their downfall spoke louder than I ever could. The last room I visited was Dad's study. His scent lingered faintly, old paper, cedar, and something warm like black coffee. I placed the court documents on his desk, a quiet offering. I sat in his chair, facing the window that looked out over the garden. The sun was lower now, stretching long shadows across the lawn. In my hands, I held the keys, the estate, the company, the legacy, and a single question. I had won the battle, but victory never heals the scars. And as they vanished into obscurity, I faced the one question they left behind. What would I do with the empire I nearly died for? I knew the answer came not from revenge, but from rebuilding, and from honoring the one man who never let me drown. The quiet in my father's study lingered like a benediction. Morning light filtered in through the plantation shutters, casting golden stripes across the mahogany desk. The chair still creaked the way it did when I was 10, swinging my legs while he read contracts aloud just so I could get used to the rhythm of real decisions, he'd say. I placed my hand on the desk's edge, grounding myself in the only legacy that mattered, one of principle, not possessions. 3 months had passed since the court ruling. Not much had made the papers beyond the headline, "Missing heir returns, fraud exposed." The rest of the world moved on quickly, but the ripple beneath the surface was where the truth remained. That morning, I was alone again, but for the right reasons this time. No more shadows, no more second-guessing the silence. It was the first quiet that didn't ache. And while I had no intention of chasing them down, the world hadn't been as forgiving to Isolde and Vera as they'd hoped. Twist S21 had played itself out naturally. Isolde was working at a small accounting office north of the city, one of those storefront firms sandwiched between a laundromat and a payday loan outlet. A friend of a friend had emailed me a photo, her hair tied up, her blazer too tight in the shoulders, hunched over a copier, No headlines, no fireworks, just the humbling dullness of the ordinary. Vera fared similarly. She'd taken over a second-hand charity shop in Little Haiti, not out of generosity, but necessity. Word had spread fast. Clients disappeared. So did her contacts. A woman who once curated guest lists for galas now managed hangars and handled return disputes with people who didn't know who she used to be and didn't care. No judge sentenced them. Life did. And it did so with the elegance they never extended to others. I didn't visit. I didn't call. I didn't need to. While they were fading, I was building. Twist S22 wasn't revenge, it was legacy. I reopened my father's firm under a new name, Lumen Foundation, drawn from the Latin for light. The company didn't just design buildings now. We built futures. I started a scholarship in his name, targeting underrepresented students in architecture and urban planning, internships, housing stipends, mentorship. Not a single favor exchanged for press coverage, just work, resources, and respect. The first group of scholars started orientation last week. I'd sat quietly in the back of the room, watching them jot notes, raise hands, challenge each other. One girl reminded me of myself, bent over her notebook, tongue pressed to her lip in concentration, trying to solve a structural issue in one of the mock-ups. I'd walked past her on my way out. "You have an eye for form," I told her. She looked up, surprised. "I just try to make it functional." "That's exactly where good design begins," I said. She smiled, and it stayed with me for days. Twist S23 came quietly, wrapped in the kind of moment no headline ever catches. Tonight was the launch gala for the scholarship. A modest venue overlooking the bay, nothing flashy. Just soft lighting, rented chairs, and the kind of people who spoke less with status and more with purpose. Hector came, wearing a button-up shirt that didn't quite fit, and shoes that looked like they'd seen the inside of more docks than dining rooms. Louis stood beside him, hands in his pockets, refusing to look impressed, though I knew he was. When it was time for the speech, I stepped onto the stage, no script, no spotlight, just me. I looked out into the audience and let the pause speak first. Then I said, "Family isn't blood. Family are the hands that pull you back when you're drowning." A few people nodded. A quiet moment of agreement. I continued. "And sometimes, you have to let go of the ones who tried to sink you, not out of hatred, but because you can't grow where you're not seen." Applause was soft, but it wasn't forced. When I stepped off the stage, Hector squeezed my shoulder once and said, "You didn't just survive, Mija. You became." Louis handed me a glass of iced tea and clinked it lightly against mine. "Your father would have been proud." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, because anything more would have cracked the calm I'd built around me. Afterward, I stepped outside alone. The night had cooled, and the breeze coming off the bay smelled like salt and jasmine. I walked toward the edge of the patio, the heels of my shoes softly echoing across the stone. I looked up. The sky was wide and quiet, the stars scattered like tiny protests against the dark. Stars are born from collapse. I was the star they tried to bury in the sea, but I rose brighter than they ever imagined. I am Nova, the sister they tried to erase, but the star they could never drown. Sometimes the people closest to us aren't family. They're the ones who teach us why we must choose ourselves. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about survival, dignity, and the quiet power of reclaiming your voice when the world tries to silence you. Have you ever felt erased by the people who were supposed to love you? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. There are more true-to-life revenge stories coming, stories that might just reflect your own. Hi, I'm Arden. My sister sold my dog without telling me, then laughed and said, "He was just a pet." But I have the footage. I watched her walk him out of my house like he meant nothing, and that was just the beginning. What do you do when your family keeps rewriting the rules, one quiet betrayal at a time? When you're always the one asked to forgive, to forget, to make peace, even as they erase you from photos, from memories, From your own life? I didn't think I'd fight back, but then I did, and now I'm wondering, what else were they willing to take if I'd stayed silent? The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was the silence. Not the peaceful kind you welcome after a long day, but the cold, echoing kind that presses against your ears. Kip always greeted me at the door, tail wagging, paws tapping, eyes full of concern like I'd been gone for years. But today, nothing. The leash still hung by the front door, unmoved. The air was too still, like the house itself was holding its breath. I set my work bag down on the counter, slowly, deliberately. Something was off. The floor gleamed. Counters sparkled. Vera had never cleaned like this, not once, unless she was expecting company. But it wasn't just the spotless surfaces. Kip's food bowl in the corner was empty, and not in the usual way. No drool, no signs he'd eaten. His water dish had been dried out so long, the ring at the bottom had faded. I walked through the house, calling his name softly. Kip? Buddy? Nothing, not even a rustle. His bed was gone too, completely gone, like it had never existed. I checked the garage, the backyard, the gate, everything in its place. Everything but Kip. My stomach twisted. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my mom. Hey, did you or Vera take Kip somewhere? No reply. I waited 5 minutes, pacing, rereading the text. Still nothing. The house creaked as I moved through it, my footsteps sounding too loud, my breathing louder still. And then I found her. Vera was in the kitchen, standing at the island with a knife in one hand and a red apple in the other, slicing casually like she was the star of a cooking show. Her expression didn't change when she saw me. "Where's Kip?" I asked, barely keeping my voice level. She looked up, then down at her apple and said, "Oh, I gave him away." My brain stopped for a second. "You what?" "He's gone. Don't worry about it." She shrugged and took a bite. "He was just a dog." It took me a full second to absorb the words. "Just a... Vera, are you out of your mind? You gave away my dog without telling me?" She rolled her eyes like I was the one being unreasonable. "I needed the place clean. You're always so... attached to things." I felt something snap inside me, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet shift, like a floorboard giving way. My voice trembled, but not with fear, with restraint. "You had no right." "You're overreacting," she said, turning her back. "Seriously, he was old. You worked too much. He needed attention. I did you a favor." I left the kitchen before I said something I couldn't take back. My hands shook as I climbed the stairs to my room, the kind of tremble that comes from your body realizing before your mind that something's changed forever. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it. The house still smelled faintly of Kip's shampoo, that soft scent of oatmeal and cedar that lingered after baths. I looked over at the dresser. His collar sat there, right where I'd left it the night before I went out of town. I walked over, picked it up, ran my fingers along the worn leather. I remembered the first day I brought him home, how he refused to sleep unless he was curled against my side. Kip wasn't just a dog. He was the first thing in my life I chose purely for me. My thumb brushed the name tag. "Kip," I whispered, to no one. I pulled out my phone again. No message from Mom. I tried calling her, straight to voicemail. Vera's laughter echoed faintly through the floor. That sound, so detached, so dismissive, felt like a slap. I couldn't cry. I wouldn't. That's what Vera always expected. Arden, the soft one. Arden, the overfeeler. But not this time. I sat on the edge of my bed and forced myself to stay still, to breathe, to think. Night fell slowly, painting the room in long shadows. I turned on the lamp and walked down to the kitchen. The house felt colder than usual. The table was empty, spotless. I took Kip's bowl from the shelf, set it on the floor, and sat in front of it. No noise, no paws rushing over, just silence. I wrapped my arms around my knees and stared at the bowl. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. Right now, I was something else, numb. But it wasn't just the dog that vanished that day. It was the last piece of peace I had left in that house. After a restless night, I tried to get through the next day without spiraling. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat on the porch for a while, letting the morning fog settle over my skin. I watched a squirrel dart across the fence and thought, absurdly, that Kip would have barked at it just to make me laugh. Instead, there was only silence and the tightening weight in my chest that I tried to hide even from myself. Around 5:30 that evening, my mom called out from the kitchen. "Dinner's at 6. You're joining us, Arden." It wasn't a question. It never was. I changed into something decent, tied my hair back, and forced myself downstairs. Vera was already at the table, glass of white wine in hand, scrolling her phone like none of this had happened. She looked up at me briefly, smiled, polite, performative, and returned to her screen. I sat down slowly, stiffly, at my usual spot. The chair creaked under me like it knew I didn't want to be there. Mom brought over a casserole dish and set it down like it was Sunday dinner, not the aftermath of a betrayal. The table was too perfect. The napkins folded, silverware aligned like we were pretending to be some kind of family from a holiday card. We started eating in awkward silence, and I tried to hold it in, but I couldn't pretend anymore, not with the bowl still missing from its corner, not with Kip's absence ringing louder than Vera's laughter. "So," I began, keeping my tone neutral, "is no one going to talk about what happened yesterday?" Vera didn't look up. "Still on about that?" "I'm on about my dog," I said, a little sharper. "You gave him away without telling me." She sighed like I'd accused her of stealing a parking spot. "I told you. He needed more than you were giving him. I found him a good home." "You're welcome." Mom laid her fork down gently, as if that could soften what came next. "Let's not ruin dinner, Arden. Please." I turned to her, stunned. "Ruin dinner?" "You're always so sensitive," she said. "It's been a hard year. Maybe Vera thought she was helping." Helping. That word nearly made me laugh. Instead, I pushed my chair back an inch. Helping would have meant asking me. Helping would have meant respecting that he was mine. "He was a pet," Vera said between sips. "Don't act like you lost a child." That cut. And it wasn't just what she said. It was how casual it was, how practiced. Like she'd been preparing that line for days. I opened my mouth to respond, but then she chuckled. "You know, the way you used to talk to him, honestly, you treated him more like a boyfriend than a dog. You'd cuddle him every night like a child. Maybe this was overdue." My chest tightened, my hand curled under the table. Mom didn't say anything. She looked at her plate. Vera laughed again, smug, waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. I stood up, quietly, placed my napkin down, and said nothing. My feet carried me out of the dining room before my voice could betray the emotions building in my throat. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I walked out into the hallway, and that's when I noticed it. The shelf, the one we all used to pass by 100 times a day, looked different. I paused. The familiar frame that once held a photo of me, Vera, and Kip on the front lawn during one of the few summer days we weren't arguing. It was gone. In its place sat a new frame. This one was shinier, larger. Inside it, Mom and Vera standing outside City Hall, dressed up for some local award ceremony. They were smiling, They looked happy. I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't even mentioned in the card underneath, handwritten in neat script, to the best daughter a mom could ask for. I don't know how long I stood there. Seconds? Minutes? All I knew was it felt intentional, not careless, not absent-minded. This was a revision of history, a clean swap. I hadn't just lost Kip. I'd been replaced in more ways than one. I walked back to my room slowly, knees heavy, mind spinning. I closed the door and leaned against it, my hands trembling, not with rage, but something colder, something like realization. They weren't sorry. They didn't see anything wrong, and maybe they never had. Maybe Kip wasn't the first thing she erased from this house. I stayed in my room the entire next morning. I wasn't avoiding anyone. I just didn't feel like sharing oxygen with people who could laugh while I bled in front of them. Around mid-afternoon, I pulled on an old sweatshirt and started cleaning. Not because the room needed it, but because I needed to move. Do something with my hands, with the static swirling in my head. As I was pushing a box of winter clothes under the bed, my hand brushed against something soft and worn. I pulled it out slowly, Kip's old chew toy, the one shaped like a squeaky hamburger. The stuffing had long since thinned out, but he'd refused to let me throw it away. Even when I brought him newer toys, he'd always dig this one back out. I sat down cross-legged on the carpet, turning the toy in my hands, and my mind drifted back, 5 years ago, almost to the day. It was a Tuesday then, too. I'd just lost my job at the nonprofit. My boyfriend had left a week before, citing the usual reasons. I was too heavy emotionally, not enough fun, and too focused on work. I had nothing left in me, and I remember walking past the animal shelter just looking for a distraction. I didn't expect to find salvation. The shelter was dimly lit, and the staff barely looked up when I walked in. But in the back cage, there was this scruffy, wide-eyed mess of a dog who locked eyes with me like he already knew me. Kip. He wasn't pretty. His left ear stood up while the right drooped, and his coat had patches missing from stress. But when I knelt down, he pressed his face against the bars like he was apologizing for being unwanted. I brought him home that same day. Vera laughed the moment she saw him. "You really picked that mutt?" she said, wrinkling her nose. "Looks like someone dragged a mop through the mud." But I didn't care. Kip was mine. The first thing I'd chosen completely for myself. Back in the present, I stood and walked out to the backyard with the toy still in hand. The late afternoon sun was starting to slant against the fence, painting the grass gold. I sat down on the step, knees pulled to my chest, toy in my lap. There was a patch of dirt in the far corner where Kip used to dig, no matter how many times I told him not to. It was still bare. I sat there a long time, until the air started to cool and the shadows stretched longer, until I couldn't hold it in anymore. Later that night, after dinner had been skipped in silence, I heard my mom doing dishes. I walked into the kitchen, clutching the toy, and waited until she turned off the faucet. "Can we talk?" I asked. She wiped her hands on a towel, then nodded slowly. "Sure, honey." We sat at the breakfast table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. "I know you think I'm being dramatic," I began. "But Kip, he wasn't just a pet. He got me through a lot. Losing him like that, it wasn't just about the dog. It was about not being asked. Again." Mom looked at me with that practiced softness she used when I was 10 and crying over forgotten birthday invitations. "I'm not saying it was the right way," she said carefully. "But your sister, she meant well. She always has. She's just stronger in certain ways. You feel things deeper." It wasn't meant to hurt, but it did. "I'm tired of being the sensitive one, Mom," I said. "You say it like it's a flaw, like it justifies people walking all over me." She didn't respond. just folded the towel neatly on the table, eyes down. I pushed a little further. When I was a kid, you gave my bike to Vera because she had longer legs. I practiced for weeks. That pink bike was mine. Mom's face tightened. And high school? I went on. I didn't get a graduation party because Vera got engaged the same weekend. No one even told me until the decorations were already up for her. That was a complicated time, she whispered. No, it was the same pattern, over and over. And Kip, he was the one thing no one else could take, until she did. There was nothing left to say. I stood up and walked to the doorway, then turned back. I just want you to know, I said, I'm done being the one who always has to understand. I'm done being erased. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I laid there in the dark, thinking about every little thing I'd let slide because I wanted peace. Every birthday overshadowed, every apology I gave just to keep things from exploding. And I thought about Kip, how he'd always nuzzle into my side when he sensed I was close to breaking. Maybe Kip wasn't the first thing she erased from this house, but he'd damn well be the last. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind paced more than my body ever could. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kip's face, confused, trusting, waiting at the door for someone who'd already decided he didn't belong anymore. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and got out of bed. I remembered the pet camera. It had been an afterthought when I bought it a few years ago, one of those impulse purchases during a sale, meant to ease my guilt about long work hours. I hadn't used it in months, but maybe it had picked up something. Anything. The camera had been mounted above the bookshelf in the living room, near the corner by the window. I got a step stool, unscrewed the mount, and took it back to my room. The device still had a micro SD card inside. My laptop took a moment to recognize the drive. The folder labeled REC popped up, filled with time-stamped video clips. My fingers trembled as I clicked the most recent folder. The footage loaded slowly. There was Kip, lying on his usual spot by the rug, tail thumping lazily. Vera entered the frame a few moments later, phone pressed to her ear, pacing like she owned the air in the room. I turned up the volume. Yeah, she was saying. She's out until Tuesday night. I'm just going to do it now. Pause. No, she won't know. Arden's clueless. She'll probably think he ran off or something. He's dumb enough. I froze. Vera crouched near Kip, called his name in that fake sweet voice she used whenever someone was watching. He trotted over, tongue out, happy as ever. She clipped on his leash like it was a casual afternoon walk. Then came the part that broke me. Before walking out, she said into the phone, "Clean space, clean start. I'll just tell her it was time." Kip looked up at her, tail wagging like he trusted every word out of her mouth. I closed the laptop, but the image stayed. His tail never stopped wagging, not even when she walked him out of my life. I didn't cry, not right away. What I felt was something colder, something sharper than tears. It was betrayal, measured and precise. The next morning, I called every vet and boarding facility within 10 miles. I knew Vera wouldn't go far. She'd want convenience. I pretended to be her, practiced her clipped tone. Most places had nothing. Then one receptionist hesitated. "Vera Lane?" the woman repeated. "Oh, yes. We had a check-in for a retriever mix. The dog was transferred to a private owner. Let me see. Yes, the contact was Elliot Pierce." Elliot. I didn't know the name. Yet, I Googled it, fast. It didn't take long to find him. Real estate investor, local Sacramento features. A man who wore crisp suits and posted motivational quotes under selfies. Hustle hard and trim the dead weight. One of those. Then I found Vera's post, brand new, captioned, New beginnings, clean spaces. In the background of the glossy kitchen counter and quartz-tiled backsplash, there he was, Kip, half hidden behind a kitchen island. His ears were still uneven, his eyes still that same shade of worry brown. My stomach turned. She hadn't given him away to someone in need. She traded him, traded my dog for a better shot at impressing a man who probably thought pets were messy and love was optional. She handed off my best friend like he was clutter, like he didn't matter. I stared at the screen, rereading that post again and again. New beginnings, clean spaces. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the laptop across the room, but instead, I clicked save. I downloaded the image. I filed away the video. I started a new folder on my desktop, evidence. My hands steadied. My breath came slower, because now I knew. She didn't just get rid of Kip, she traded him for status. The sound of the door closing behind me was the only thing I allowed myself. No slam, no scene, just the unmistakable echo of finality. It was early evening, the sun just beginning to dip behind the treetops outside the kitchen window. I walked down the hall with Kip's leash clip still clenched in my fist, cold metal pressing into my palm. I didn't go to my room right away. I needed air, even if it came from the back porch that always smelled faintly of old mulch and overripe lemons. I sat for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around me, not like comfort, but like armor. My thoughts were still circling the same orbit, but now they had weight, proof. Later that night, when the house had mostly settled, I grabbed my laptop and started digging. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. Maybe more lies, maybe just something that told me I wasn't crazy. I clicked through old text backups synced to my cloud account and found a group chat I hadn't opened in months. It was a thread with Vera and a few of her friends from her PR job. I scrolled through messages full of eye-roll emojis, wine memes, and snarky gossip until I found it. "If Elliot doesn't like the dog," Vera had written, "I'll just get rid of it. Arden's too fragile to stop me anyway." I froze. Not sensitive, not emotional, fragile, like I was a china doll too delicate to stand up for herself. The irony made me laugh once, short, bitter. Fragile. She always used that word like it was a fact written on my birth certificate, and now she'd broadcast it like some inside joke. I stared at the message until the words blurred, then copied it. I added it to a folder I'd created earlier that day called Truth. Inside were the pet cam screenshots, the Instagram photo, and now this. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Something inside me had shifted. No more wondering what to do. No more asking for fairness from people who specialized in erasing me. After a shower, I printed every piece of evidence, color pages, 3-hole punched, clipped neatly. I placed them in a slim binder with a clear plastic cover. Not dramatic, just organized. Just unignorable. When I walked into the kitchen that evening, Mom was chopping vegetables for stir-fry. Vera sat at the island with her feet up on the bar stool, scrolling her phone like a teenager instead of a 37-year-old woman who'd just stolen my dog. I didn't speak. I didn't look at either of them. I walked to the dining table, placed the binder right in the center, and pulled out a chair, sat down, waited. Vera glanced up first. "What's with the school project?" I didn't answer. Mom turned from the counter, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and approached the table. She picked up the binder, opened the first page. It was the message, the one calling me fragile. Then the screenshot of Kip on camera, trusting her as she leashed him. Then the Instagram photo with Kip half hidden in a stranger's kitchen. Then the receipt from the vet clinic under Vera's name, authorizing a release to Elliot Pierce. Her hands started to shake by the time she reached the last page. "What? What is this?" she whispered. Vera, still acting unfazed, stood and leaned over Mom's shoulder. "Oh, come on. This is ridiculous. You're making it seem like I sold your child to the black market." I looked up at her, steady. "One more lie," I said evenly, "and I'll stop protecting what's left of your image." That got her attention. Her smirk faltered. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, standing, "you've gotten away with a lot in this house, but not this. You're not going to walk around pretending like you're the victim here. You lied. You manipulated. And you didn't care what it cost anyone but you." I turned to Mom. Her eyes were wide, her mouth partially open. She wasn't defending anyone. Not yet. I placed Kip's leash clip gently on the table, next to the binder. "That's the only thing I have left of him," I said. "And I'm not asking anymore. I'm acting." Then I walked out. I didn't slam the door because I wanted her to hear what silence sounded like when it came from me. The morning after I left that binder on the table, I drove across town without touching the radio once. The silence in my car felt cleaner than the one I'd left behind. Intentional, necessary. It was a Wednesday, just cool enough to keep the windows cracked, the kind of day when the light hits everything just a little too honestly. I'd made an appointment the night before with an animal law group. Small office, 5 stars on Yelp, 1 attorney and a paralegal. But I didn't care about prestige. I just needed someone who would say, "You're not crazy. This matters." The office was in a converted house tucked between a chiropractor and a bike shop. A wooden sign above the door read, "Paw Justice." Inside, it smelled like lemon-scented cleaner and printer toner. A woman named Laurel greeted me, calm and warm in that way that made me feel like she'd seen worse. I handed her the binder. "Take your time," I said, "but it's all in there." She flipped through page by page, didn't rush, didn't frown, just nodded occasionally and scribbled a note in the margin with a purple pen. Then she looked up at me and said the first thing that made my chest loosen in days. "This is theft," she said plainly. "Fraud, actually. And if Kip's microchipped under your name, you're the legal owner." I nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "No, he is. I have the paperwork. I have all of it." Laurel reached into a drawer, pulled out a thin form with a yellow header. "We'll start with a cease and desist. We'll give her 72 hours to return the dog. If she doesn't respond, we escalate." She looked me square in the eyes. "I've seen people get away with worse, but not when the victim's this prepared." I signed where she told me to, left with a folder in one hand and a different weight in the other. Not grief, not rage, something steadier, something close to control. Back home, I passed Vera in the hallway. She didn't speak. Neither did I. But I noticed the corner of her mouth twitch when she saw the envelope under my arm. Good. Let her wonder. The email went out that afternoon. Laurel also sent a hard copy by courier, signature required. I watched the tracking number update in real time. Delivered, 4:18 p.m. For the first time in days, I breathed like I meant it. That evening, I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then opened the message. "Hey, Dana here, Dana Shields, from undergrad. I saw Vera's post and, well, I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I sat down on the edge of the tub, toothbrush still in hand. "I remember when you got Kip. You were heartbroken, and he was your light. You saved each other. I don't know the full story now, but I believe you. I always did. Tears came easy then, not because I was sad, but because I finally felt seen. Dana wasn't family. She hadn't lived in our house of subtle dismissals and polite punishments, but she remembered who I was before I started shrinking myself for peace." I typed back slowly, thumb shaking a little. Thank you. That means more than I can say. The message sat there on the screen, glowing soft in the dim bathroom light. It wasn't just support, it was memory. A person remembering the version of me that even I'd forgotten. And that's when I realized I hadn't just let Vera take Kip. I'd let them all chip away at me for years, made excuses, shrugged off insults, smiled through dismissals. Not anymore. The next morning, I set the folder on the kitchen counter. Mom was pouring coffee. Vera, across the room, looked like she hadn't slept. Her phone buzzed. She checked the screen and froze. Must have been the lawyer's number. I didn't say a word. Just poured myself a glass of water and left the room. Because power only matters when the other side still thinks you're powerless. I woke up the next morning before the alarm had a chance to buzz. There was a strange stillness in the house, like the kind that settles after a long argument when no one dares speak too loud. I stayed in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, the corners of my room still dim in the early light. At 8:07 a.m., I reached for my phone and opened Instagram. By 8:32, the post was live. It wasn't anything elaborate, just a 3-slide story. No voiceover, no hashtags, just facts. Slide 1. A still image from the pet cam video. Vera, in jeans and a blazer, Kip's leash in her hand, opening the front door. Kip's body half out of frame, his tail mid-wag. Slide 2. The text message where she called me too fragile to stop her. Bolded and underlined, no extra commentary. Slide 3. A plain white background with black text. You don't get to take what's not yours, especially not family. I put the phone down, let the words settle, let the house breathe. By 9:20, it had over 2,400 views. By 10:11, comments started rolling in. Wait, this is awful. She did what? If this happened to me, I'd sue. I didn't respond to any of them. I just watched. At 11:43, I heard Vera's door slam. Hard. She stomped into the kitchen, phone to her ear, hissing into the speaker. I don't know what she thinks she's doing, but it's not going to work. No, I'm not taking it down. This is slander. She's twisting everything. I can't believe this. She noticed me standing by the stairs. You think this makes you look strong? She snapped, holding up her phone. Posting stuff like some pathetic little martyr? You always need a stage. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. My phone buzzed again. The views had hit 14,000. By noon, she had posted her own rebuttal, a polished photo of her and Elliot smiling in what looked like a model home kitchen, captioned, "People will always try to tear you down when you're building something real. Let them talk." But the internet didn't fall for it. One comment read, "So building something real means stealing a dog from your sister?" Another added, "You pulled the same thing at the shelter drive last year. Remember how you dumped those 3 puppies because your shoes got muddy?" Others followed, a slow burn of truth bubbling up from people who'd stayed quiet too long. It was just past 2 p.m. when I got the call. The number wasn't saved, but it had a Sacramento area code. I picked up, stepping into my room and closing the door behind me. "Hi, is this Arden Keel?" a woman asked. Her voice was measured, professional. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Maria Lopez from Paw Justice Coalition. We're a non-profit animal advocacy group. And one of our volunteers forwarded us your post. We've also received previous complaints tied to that household, and I wanted to let you know we're taking this seriously." I sat on the edge of my bed. My legs suddenly felt heavier. Maria continued, "The footage you shared, it's clear, and you have documentation on the dog's ownership. If you'd be open to it, we'd like to assist in escalating this, both legally and in terms of public awareness. If that's something you're comfortable with. I swallowed once, slowly. Yes, I'm very open to that. She didn't push, she didn't press, just said, "Good, we'll be in touch by tomorrow with next steps. And for what it's worth, you did the right thing." After the call, I placed the phone down and stared out the window for a long time. The backyard was quiet again, the grass where Kip used to dig untouched, like it was waiting. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Not just legally, not just online, but finally, I had people who saw it too. The pattern, the control, the way everything I'd cared about was turned into something convenient for someone else's narrative. This wasn't just about Kip anymore. It was about every time I was told to sit down and stay quiet. By Friday, the air in the house had changed. Not in the way it does with seasons, but in the way silence starts to feel heavy, like furniture that's been left too long in the same spot, collecting dust around its edges. I returned home that afternoon to grab a few boxes I had stored in the hall closet. I had no intention of staying long. I parked in the driveway instead of the garage, just in and out. That was the plan. As I stepped through the front door, I noticed it right away. The photo frame on the hallway table had been changed again, not the shiny, oversized one of Vera and Mom in front of City Hall. That one was gone. In its place sat the old photo, worn at the corners, colors slightly faded from sunlight. It was the one we took years ago. Vera, me, and Kip in the front yard. Kip had his tongue out, ears askew. I was crouched beside him, arm around his chest. Vera stood stiffly behind us, hands on her hips, half smiling like she wasn't quite comfortable. I stopped in front of it. No note, no explanation. Just the picture, quietly returned to where it used to belong. As I stood there, my mother walked by, carrying a laundry basket. She paused for a moment beside me, but didn't look at the frame. She didn't speak either. She just walked past and disappeared into the laundry room. No apology, no tears, just presence. And somehow, that landed harder than if she'd broken down at my feet. I went upstairs, packed my things quickly. The hallway was quiet, except for the occasional hum of the washer. When I came down with a box in my arms, Vera was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone with one leg tucked under her. She didn't look up when I entered, but she knew I was there. "You happy now?" she said flatly. "You ruined everything." I set the box down gently near the front door. "I didn't ruin anything. I revealed it." "You humiliated me," she said, eyes still fixed on her screen. "Elliot won't return my calls. His assistant told me he's focusing on clarity and alignment right now, whatever that means." I didn't respond. I walked past her into the kitchen, picked up Kip's new collar from the hook near the pantry. It still had the tag I ordered last year. Kip Keel in engraved lettering. The K was a little crooked, an error from the online shop I never bothered to fix. "You think this makes you better?" Vera's voice rose. "Air our business like that? Publicly?" I turned to face her. Calm. It wasn't business, it was the truth. She stood, crossed the room in a few quick steps. "You had options. You could have talked to me. You didn't have to make me look like some what?" I interrupted. "Some woman who gave away her sister's dog to impress a man? Because that's what you did. You didn't lose Elliot because of me. You lost him because he saw what you're capable of." Her jaw tensed. "You always make things so dramatic." I stepped closer, met her eyes. "No, I make things visible." "You don't get to call that drama." She hesitated, lips parted like she had another line locked and loaded, but it never came. "I want an apology," she said finally, voice tight. "A real one." I laughed once, not unkindly, just exhausted. "For what? Telling the truth? Showing people who you are?" She held my gaze, like she was waiting for me to soften. But I didn't. Not this time. I never had a sister, I said. I had a rival wearing my last name. She blinked. That, apparently, cut deeper than anything I'd posted online. I walked to the door, picked up my box, and opened it with one hand. As I stepped out onto the porch, the late afternoon sun caught the edge of the screen door, casting a faint shadow across the floor. I turned once, briefly. Mom stood in the doorway behind me, laundry basket now empty, eyes on the floor. She didn't say anything, neither did I. But I think, for the first time in a very long time, she understood the silence wasn't meant to punish, it was meant to end something. I reached my car, placed the box in the back seat, and gently set Kip's collar on top. Tomorrow, I'd be picking him up from the temporary foster center that Pa Justice had arranged. Tomorrow, he'd come home. But today, I left behind the house, the stories, the history that had always made room for everyone else but me. Today, I didn't ask for space. I took it. Some things end quietly, others leave echoes you never forget. The sky was still dark when I woke up the next morning, not with dread or weight, but with a calm I hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of quiet that didn't make your chest tighten, but instead let you breathe a little deeper. I got dressed slowly, choosing the soft green sweater Kip always liked to nuzzle against. My new apartment still smelled faintly like fresh paint and cardboard. The living room had only a couch, a lamp, and a pile of half-opened boxes, but it was mine, uncomplicated. No one else's voice lived in these walls. By 8:00 a.m., I was pulling into the small lot behind the foster center. The building was modest, just a single story with a white fence and a sign out front painted by hand. Pa Justice, Foster's Rescues. Maria, the case coordinator who had called me days earlier, was waiting on the porch. She waved as I stepped out of the car. "He's ready," she said. "He's been waiting by the door since 7. I followed her inside, my heartbeat pacing ahead of me, and then there he was. Kip stood at the gate, tail going full speed, ears lopsided like always. When he saw me, he let out one of his small, questioning yelps, his "Is it really you?" bark. I didn't cry right away. I crouched down, opened my arms, and he pressed his whole body against my chest like he'd never left it. Only then did the tears come, but not from sadness. He licked my face, whined into my neck, and leaned his weight into me as if to say, "Finally." Later that morning, I took him straight to the park off Riverway. We used to come here every Saturday before life got messy. The eucalyptus trees lined the edge of the trail, and the breeze still smelled of pine needles and dust. I let Kip lead the way. His leash tugged gently in my hand, not pulling, just reminding me he was there. I let him sniff every patch of grass, greet every stranger, chase after squirrels he'd never catch. When we got back to the apartment, he curled up on the rug near the window and slept like it was the safest place on earth. Maybe it was. That night, after dinner, I sat down with my journal. I hadn't touched it in weeks. Too much had been happening to pause and reflect. But now, with Kip snoring at my feet, I picked up my pen. There was a voicemail from Mom I still hadn't responded to. I hadn't deleted it either. "I saw the video again," she'd said. "I should have protected you sooner. I just didn't know how." I replayed her words in my mind, then wrote in my journal, "Forgiveness isn't always about them. Sometimes it's the key that opens your own gate." The next weekend, I showed up at the local shelter, volunteer application in hand, Kip by my side. I figured I owed the world something better than silence. Maria greeted me with a smile and introduced me to the rest of the staff. He seems like he's been through something, one of the volunteers said, kneeling to pet Kip. But he's so well loved. I just smiled. I didn't correct her. I didn't explain. The story wasn't hers to hear, and it didn't need to be. Kip was home, not just physically, but in spirit. And I wasn't walking around with an apology stitched to my back anymore. In this new apartment, in this quieter life, I found something I hadn't realized I was looking for. A space where I didn't have to earn the right to exist. I no longer needed to make room for people who couldn't see my worth until it cost them something. Kip didn't just come home. He brought back the part of me they all tried to erase, and this time, I'm not giving it up. Sometimes, the real victory isn't getting back what was taken. It's realizing you never needed their permission to stand up for yourself. If you've ever been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one asked to let it go just to keep the peace, maybe it's time to ask, what part of yourself have you been giving away to stay included? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more true, raw, and deeply human stories like this one. Hi, I'm Tamsin. I paid for the house, the meals, the boat tours, everything. And yet, the night we sat down to dinner, my mother looked at me and said, "This trip isn't about you." They wore shirts with everyone's name but mine, gave my concert ticket away to a stranger, replaced me in photos, in bedrooms, in the story they told the world. But what hurt more than the erasure was how natural they made it look. So I did the one thing they never expected. I stopped funding the fantasy. Ever wonder what it takes for a woman to freeze her own family out of her life? And her wallet? I arrived in Destin late afternoon on a Thursday, the sky leaning toward gold as the sun dipped closer to the water. My suitcase rolled awkwardly across the gravel driveway, the wheels catching in loose stones. I could hear laughter from the porch before I even reached the steps. Vera opened the door just wide enough for a quick hug that never really landed. "You made it," she said like I'd dropped in uninvited. Behind her, Callista was already snapping selfies with Leora and Declan, the filters already smoothing out their smiles. She didn't even glance in my direction. The house was beautiful, clean, curated, coastal chic. Everything matched except me. I placed my bag by the guest room door, the smallest one in the back, and took a breath before joining them on the patio. It wasn't that I expected fanfare, but I thought maybe something more than you made it. Dinner that evening was grilled snapper, corn on the cob, and watermelon salad Callista's idea. The table was set for 8, even though only 6 of us were there. Declan had brought his cousin for the first night, but he'd left before I arrived. My seat was next to Leora, across from Vera. Conversation flowed easily about Leora's new swim class, Callista's latest brand deal, Vera's insightful take on the news. I nodded where appropriate, offered to pass the butter, and smiled too much. Halfway through Callista's retelling of some hilarious airport mix-up, Vera suddenly turned to me, napkin folded neatly in her lap. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "This trip isn't about you, Tamsin," she said, cutting through the table like a knife. "Please don't make it about yourself." The table fell into a strange hush. No one gasped. No one defended me. Forks still moved, glasses clinked. Even Leora just looked down into her lemonade like she hoped it might swallow her. I managed a half smile, bit into a piece of corn that suddenly tasted like nothing, and nodded as if I agreed. I didn't speak for the rest of the meal. I didn't trust what might come out. That night, I stared at the ceiling fan blades spinning above me, counting their rotations until I lost track. The next morning, the house buzzed with plans. Vera had laid out matching t-shirts for the family, navy blue, with Jennings Beach Week 2024, printed in cursive across the chest. I found mine still in the shopping bag, folded neatly on the counter. A sticky note stuck to the plastic read Tamsin. When I held it up, Vera laughed. "They must be auto-corrected your name, sweetie. You know how tech is." No one else seemed to notice, or care. We walked to the dock together. Callista held Leora's hand. Declan carried the cooler, and I trailed behind with the towels. A young man managing the morning tours approached us with a clipboard. "You with the Jennings family?" he asked, scanning the group. Before I could answer, Vera smiled and said, "Oh, she's just tagging along." The man nodded, like that explained everything, and turned to count life vests. I stood there, blinking. The wind pushed hair into my mouth. No one turned back. I stayed behind while they boarded the boat, claiming I had a slight headache. Vera nodded, didn't offer anything more. On the walk back alone, my sandals rubbed blisters into my heels, and my throat burned from saying nothing. "I paid for the Airbnb deposit," I muttered aloud, voice catching in the sea air. "I shipped Leora's birthday bike. And Im just tagging along?" But I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. Instead, I made coffee, sat on the porch swing, and watched the sky shift from seafoam to cerulean as the sun rose higher. It's only day one, I told myself. Maybe tomorrow will be better. But even I didn't believe that anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. I drafted a letter that made silence into a sound they couldn't ignore. The message started soft, then steady. "Baby girl, I know they make you feel like you're not needed, but I saw you. I always saw you." We sat down for lunch the next day at a waterfront spot with picnic tables, umbrellas fluttering in the breeze, and the smell of fried oysters wafting through the salt air. Callista had chosen the place. "Very local, very authentic," she said, with the confidence of someone who had skimmed Yelp reviews while tanning. The waiter dropped off the check without asking who was taking it. That's when Callista, cheerful as ever, announced loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear, "Tamsin's got this one. She always does." Leora clapped her hands and said, "Auntie Tamsin pays for everything." Everyone laughed. Vera gave me that familiar look, part proud, part expectant, and said, "You're always so generous." I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. I just pulled my card out and tapped it like I had so many times before. The screen flashed, $413.78. I told myself it didn't matter. Told myself it was just lunch. Told myself I was being included. But it felt more like I was paying rent for a seat at their table. Back at the house, while they napped or scrolled their phones, I opened my banking app. The boat tour Callista had mentioned earlier, just a little treat Declan and I, booked for the weekend, had already been paid for. And it wasn't Declan's card. It wasn't Callista's either. It was mine. A $780 charge, labeled Jennings Charters. I'd given Vera access to my backup card 2 years ago in case of emergency. Apparently, keeping Callista's couple's getaway afloat counted as one. That night, while everyone gathered on the patio to play card games, Callista uploaded a collage to her social feed. Family is everything. It was a carousel sunlit moments of them laughing at lunch, riding bikes along the boardwalk, hugging on the dock. The photo taken during lunch-own of the most liked showed everyone at the table mid-toast. I wasn't in it. I'd taken the picture. A comment popped up beneath the post. "Where's Tamsin?" It was visible for all of 30 seconds before it vanished. I added my own, just a line. Just enough. Photographers don't count, I guess. It disappeared within minutes. No reply, no call. Just more hearts and clapping emojis from people who didn't know better. I left the patio quietly, walked to the edge of the beach behind the house. The wind smelled like sunscreen and low tide. The moon floated above the water like it was keeping a secret. I sat on the porch swing and opened the family group chat. Dozens of messages I hadn't seen. Plans I wasn't included in. Inside jokes, voice notes from Leora. A meme Vera didn't understand, but laughed at anyway. There were spreadsheets for meal prep, links to pre-ordered groceries, a shared folder titled Jennings Memories 2024. Not one picture with me in it. I thought back to last April, when I funded Leora's entire birthday party. The bounce house, the catered cupcakes, the glitter face painter. Vera had promised, "Well, make sure everyone knows it was you." 2 days later, Callista posted a video recap. Caption, Auntie Callista pulled off another perfect day. I remember watching it alone in my apartment. I didn't comment, didn't text, just sat there and let the silence settle around me. Tonight felt the same. I whispered into the dark, more to myself than anyone else. You don't get credit for keeping a system running when no one sees you as part of it. And that was it. That was the thing. I hadn't been forgotten. I hadn't slipped their minds. I'd been carved out erased with intent and precision. They didn't lose me. They'd never counted me to begin with. That night, I opened a voicemail I hadn't dared to touch in 3 years. It wasn't just a message. It was the only voice that never made me feel small. I lay in bed, face lit only by the soft glow of my phone screen. Everyone else had gone to sleep hours ago, and the house had settled into that strange kind of silence that only comes when people are too proud to apologize out loud. I opened my voicemail folder, not the one for new calls, but the one labeled Don't Delete. There it was, Raymond, my father. The message had been sitting there for 139 days. I counted once, never had the nerve to open it again. But tonight, after being erased from yet another group photo and watching my name vanish from a comment thread like it had never existed, I tapped play. Baby girl, I know they make you feel like you're not needed. But I saw you. I always saw you. His voice was slower than I remembered. Deeper. Not because it had changed, but because I had forgotten how much safety lived in it. He talked about a dinner I had hosted years ago. The one where Vera showed up late and left early. Where Callista made a toast that somehow forgot I'd organized the entire evening. You came early, stayed late, cleaned dishes you didn't dirty. That's who you are. But I need you to remember, you don't have to prove your place to people who would rather forget you than thank you. I listened twice, then again. I closed my eyes and let his voice live inside me for just a few more minutes. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even emotional. It was factual. He saw me. I didn't cry. I didn't feel broken. I just adjusted. Like my spine straightened itself. The next morning, I went out to the back porch while the rest of the house was still tucked in. Vera's curtains were drawn. Callista's door was slightly open, fan humming from inside. I carried my coffee out, wrapped a towel around my shoulders against the breeze, and sat in the swing chair. Leora padded outside in socks and a long t-shirt, rubbing her eyes. "Aunt Tamsin?" she asked, voice still sticky with sleep. "Do you need help with money?" I blinked. "What?" "Grandma said you always waste it. That's why you work all the time, right?" I stared at her, this kid who only knew what she'd been told, who repeated things like facts because no one had told her they were lies. I didn't correct her, didn't tell her Vera was wrong. I just smiled and said, "No, honey, I don't need help. I need boundaries." She nodded like she understood, then wandered back inside without another word. That hurt more than anything Callista had ever said to my face. It wasn't cruelty, it was conditioning. They weren't just ignoring me, they were rewriting me in real time, planting it in the minds of people too young to question the script. Later, after the morning bustle began and everyone got ready for another over-planned bonding activity, I went for a walk along the shoreline. I didn't bring my phone, just myself and the wind. I thought about how many times I'd rewritten myself to fit. How I'd bitten my tongue so hard it nearly became muscle memory. How every time I heard, "Don't make it about you," I made myself smaller. And for what? So they could assign my kindness to someone flashier? Louder? More photogenic? Every time I said it's no big deal, I'd buried another version of myself. The quiet one, the reliable one, the background character in a show she paid for, but never got to star in. I reached the end of the cove, where the rocks jutted up into the water and the waves cracked softly against them. I sat on a large stone, let my feet dangle, and took a deep breath that I hadn't realized I'd been holding since Colorado. That voicemail wasn't just reassurance, it was evidence that once someone who mattered saw me clearly, not as sensitive or complicated or dramatic, but as someone who showed up. I whispered to the wind, "I'm not leaving because they didn't include me. I'm leaving because they're pretending I never did." And in that moment, for the first time since arriving, I didn't feel erased. I felt real. She was telling another version of me, one she'd crafted carefully for an outsider. But this time, I didn't just listen, I documented. It was mid-afternoon, and the kitchen smelled like lime and cut cantaloupe. I was slicing fruit quietly, trying to stay out of the way, blending into the rhythm of the house like I always had. From where I stood, I could hear voices drifting in through the open screen door, Vera's tone, syrupy and performative, the one she used when explaining me to strangers. "She's always been sensitive," she said with a light chuckle. "We've tried everything, but she sees things that aren't even there. Drama seems to follow her." A second voice joined, Callista, naturally. "Remember her graduation?" she said, like it was a punchline. She cried because her name wasn't on the banner. She made the whole day about herself. The knife in my hand paused mid-slice. My fingers didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. I just stood still. Then, with 2 taps, I opened my voice memo app and hit record. I didn't speak. I didn't walk out to confront them. I didn't defend myself. I just let them keep going, spinning a version of me that sounded polished, familiar, rehearsed. It wasn't the lies that cued it, was the ease. The way the words rolled off their tongues like they'd said them before, like they believed them more with each retelling. A few hours later, Leora ran into the kitchen, still wearing her dolphin print swimsuit. "Aunt Tamsin! We're going on a dolphin boat! Grandma said she booked it just for us." I smiled, not wide enough to mean it. "That's great, sweetie." She skipped off to change, her feet slapping lightly against the tile. I pulled out my phone, opened the banking app. The charge was there, already processed, $675, billed to the card Vera still had access to. I'd given it to her years ago, just for emergencies. Apparently, a dolphin tour for Callista and Declan now qualified. I didn't ask them about it. Didn't point out the irony of me paying for an event I wasn't invited to. Instead, I took a screenshot and saved it to a new folder. Emotional Overdrafts. I titled the image, July 4th Tour. Confronting them felt pointless. They weren't debating reality. They were performing a play. I wasn't in the cast. I was just the sponsor. Back in the hallway, I walked past their rooms. Coordinated outfits were already laid out, matching linen shorts, pastel button-downs, even a new pair of sunglasses on Declan's nightstand, still with the tag on. From the living room, Callista's voice floated out. "Don't forget the Instagram captions, short and sweet. Tag the charter, too." No one asked if I was coming. No one noticed when I didn't pack a beach bag. They loaded up the van in the driveway, with excited chatter, and posed for pictures by the palm trees. I stayed behind, sitting on the porch swing with a glass of water and my phone. I replayed the audio recording from earlier. My voice wasn't in it, but I was everywhere in it. Every pause Vera used to sound compassionate, every fake laugh Callista forced, it was all theater. And it finally stepped into the role of audience, not cast. I whispered into the quiet, "If you're going to write me out, I'll make sure the real version survives." Then I saved the recording, uploaded it to my cloud, and titled it, Unedited, July 3rd, 2:12 p.m. That evening, over dry chicken and forced laughter, they turned their eyes on me and dared to ask why I was ruining the trip. The table was set just as Callista liked it. White linens, flickering battery candles, napkins folded into tiny sailboats. Dinner was grilled chicken and some half-burned cornbread. Vera insisted on finishing herself, as if overcooking things gave her control. I carried plates to the table, aligned the cutlery, and topped off the lemonade pitcher. Not a single thank you, not even eye contact. Leora was doing a little cheer routine on the grass near the patio, humming a song from the dolphin tour I'd financed, but never attended. Callista's phone was clipped to a tripod, capturing natural footage for her next family reel. Her camera lens swept over the table twice. Neither time did it linger on me. I sat silently, chewing through my meal. I wasn't planning to speak unless someone forced me to. They did. Vera started. She set down her fork and folded her hands like she was about to offer a prayer. "Tamsin," she said with that brittle voice she used when pretending concern, "you've seemed a bit distant this week, not your usual self." Before I could respond, Callista leaned forward, elbows on the table like we were at a reunion intervention. "We all came here to reconnect, to make memories," she said, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're making it really hard to do that." My jaw clenched, but I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "Uncomfortable or uncooperative?" Vera blinked. "That's not what I said." "No," I replied, "but it's exactly what you meant." The silence that followed was so heavy it made the paper lanterns sway. Leora paused mid-cheer and looked over. Declan busied himself with cutting more chicken. Nobody jumped in to defend them this time. I reached into my pocket, opened the voice memos app, and hit play. From my phone came Vera's voice, syrupy and smooth. "She's always been sensitive. We've tried everything, Callista. She cried at her graduation, over her name not being on the banner, made the whole day about herself." I placed the phone on the table, let it play without commentary, without context, just sound and truth. When it ended, I looked up. "You've been telling a version of me for so long, you've started to believe it's the only one that exists," I said. "But I've been the one cleaning up behind your stories, fixing the mess, making sure the gaps don't show." No one spoke. Even Vera, usually so quick to spin, seemed to have lost her words. "You want me to apologize for making things uncomfortable," I added, "but the discomfort isn't mine. It's yours because I'm not shrinking anymore." Declan put his fork down finally. "I think I'm gonna head inside," he mumbled, eyes locked on his plate. I finished the last bite of my chicken. No dramatic exit, no grand speech, just stillness. I stood, picked up my plate, and walked toward the kitchen door. Vera began to say something, maybe another correction, maybe another manipulation. I didn't care. I lifted one hand with a single finger raised, not rude, not hostile, just a signal. Enough. Inside, I rinsed my plate, stacked it in the dishwasher, and toweled my hands dry. Then I went to my room, pulled out my laptop, and opened the shared family account dashboard. Logged in, breathed. For the next hour, I combed through spreadsheets, reservation logs, and automated payments. No one knocked, no one called. I wasn't being dramatic anymore. I was documenting the truth they'd tried to delete. Declan had taken my seat. Callista had taken my credit, but I'd taken the receipt. I woke to the scent of coffee already brewed and the hollow kind of laughter that comes when people are too aware they're being watched. The family was buzzing. The concert was today. The one I'd spent weeks planning, months ahead, pre-booking 6 seats, sending confirmation emails, even adjusting schedules so Vera wouldn't miss her Tuesday water aerobics back home. I hadn't been thanked, but I didn't expect to be. Still, I didn't expect to be forgotten. I walked into the kitchen just in time to hear Callista say, "It's going to be perfect." 6 seats, Declan and I up front, Mom and Leora just behind. I didn't hear the rest. I only heard the count. "Where's my seat?" I asked, quiet but firm. The room stilled for a beat. Vera turned from the sink, drying her hands with a dish towel. "We thought you weren't interested anymore," she said in that voice she used with cashiers and waiters. Overly polite, built for dismissal. "You've seemed so distant," Callista chimed in without looking up from her phone. "We gave it to Aunt Marie's neighbor's son. You know, that cute one who's staying down the block." I nodded, slowly, like I was trying to understand a foreign language. I opened my Venmo app, scrolled back 3 weeks, and there it was, $740. The note read, "Full payment, family concert night." I didn't say a word. Not because I didn't have one, but because silence, wielded well, is louder than any accusation. I went upstairs, needing air that wasn't recycled through fake grace. When I opened my bedroom door, I froze. My suitcase was gone. In its place was a note, scribbled in Vera's familiar cursive. "Hope you don't mind. Switched with Declan so he can sleep next to Callista. Yours is the guest room near the laundry. Love, Mom." The new room, if you could call it that, was a narrow box beside the utility closet. No windows. A twin mattress that sank in the middle. The scent of chlorine and dryer sheets clung to the air like mildew trying to masquerade as clean. I stood there, holding the note. Then I folded it slowly, slid it into my pocket, and walked back to retrieve my suitcase. It was parked against the wall outside the laundry room, zipped but slightly unlatched, like even it didn't want to stay. I didn't cry. I didn't pack in a fury. I moved with robotic calm, folding the clothes I had just unpacked 2 days ago. Shirt, pants, dress I never got to wear. I zipped the suitcase closed, then opened my laptop. Airline app, return flight, available seat zone left for the next morning. I booked it. Then I logged into the shared family spreadsheet Vera had insisted we keep for budget transparency. One by one, I removed my name from every section: lodging, car rental, dinner plans, gift contributions, grocery rotations. I clicked Leave Folder without hesitation. After that, I sat down and drafted a message just for myself. Not to send, not to show. Just to name the thing I now knew with certainty. You weren't erased, you were replaced, and now, you're reclaiming. That night, no one knocked on my door. No one noticed my absence at dinner. No one asked why I'd skipped dessert or where I'd gone after lunch. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel hurt by their silence. I matched it. Before I left, I did one more thing. A single click that would rewrite the rules they thought I still played by. The first sign? A declined transaction. The second? Their expressions when I didn't offer to fix it. I woke up early, though I hadn't set an alarm. Maybe it was the weight of knowing I wouldn't be here much longer. The suitcase by the door was already packed. All I had to do was wait for morning to come fully, like waiting for a curtain to fall on a show I hadn't auditioned for, but was forced to act in anyway. At breakfast, I kept to myself. They didn't seem to notice. Or maybe they were pretending not to. Callista had brought something to the table, not food, not conversation, but a photo album. I had it printed as a surprise, she beamed. For Mom. Vera's eyes lit up. Oh, Callista, you didn't have to. They flipped through the pages, narrating each memory like it had happened only to them. Leora and Grandma at the dock. Declan and I on the paddleboards. 4th of July dinner, what a spread. I sipped my coffee in silence, knowing full well I'd been present for all of it. But when my own face finally appeared, arms full of towels, sun in my eyes, a rare smile not yet rubbed raw by the week's tension, I noticed the caption beneath it. Unidentified guest, LOL. The laughter that followed was casual, comfortable, as if none of them considered what it might feel like to be unnamed in your own family's scrapbook. I didn't laugh. I didn't ask questions. I didn't correct them. I stood, rinsed my mug, and went for a walk. It was humid outside, the kind of heat that sticks behind your knees and on the back of your neck. I made my way toward the resort's lobby for a coffee refill, thinking maybe a change of scenery would rinse the taste of that caption from my mouth. I had barely stepped into the lobby when one of the young staff members smiled at me. Hey there, are you one of the housekeepers? The Jennings family said you'd be around. I stared at him for a breath longer than necessary. Then I responded with clarity, not malice. No, I am the Jennings family. His smile faltered. I didn't wait for a response. I walked past him, grabbed my coffee, and stepped outside. Sitting on the stone bench near the parking lot, I opened my phone and typed a single line into my Notes app. Let them explain this version without me. When I got back to the house, it was mostly quiet. Callista and Vera were prepping dinner, humming to some acoustic playlist. Declan was half asleep in a hammock, and Leora was on her tablet, headphones in. I walked past them and into my room, closed the door, sat at the desk. I opened my laptop and logged into my financial dashboard. Then I began. First, I froze the shared grocery delivery account, the one they used weekly, billed to my name. Then Vera's Uber profile disabled. Streaming services? Gone. The spreadsheet folder for the family reunion ID set up last spring? I revoked access. One by one, I stripped away every resource they never thanked me for, but never hesitated to use. Then, I opened the last tab. The family credit card. The one I'd co-signed. The one they believed was endlessly renewable, like my patience. I stared at the active status for a moment. Then I clicked. Freeze. Status. Inactive. No announcement. No ceremony. Just a quiet click a final punctuation mark. Then I leaned back, set my hands on my lap, and let the quiet come. Not relief, not vengeance, clarity. They didn't know it yet. But by dinner, everything they thought was still under control would stop working. They didn't know it yet, but by dinner, everything they thought was still under control would stop working. The trip ended in chaos for them. Accusations flying like seagulls startled off the shore, flapping and loud, spiraling into panic. For me, it ended with quiet. A closed door, a zipped suitcase, and a one-way ticket to someplace where I wouldn't have to shrink to fit or audition for a seat at someone else's table. I woke before dawn, not from restlessness, but because for the first time in a long while, I'd slept deeply enough to wake early. Not out of anxiety, out of clarity. The air in the house felt strange. Still, as if it, too, was holding its breath, aware something was shifting. Something final. The kind of shift you can't undo with apologies, or group texts, or family brunches. A slow turning of a page that won't flip back. My suitcase waited by the door, zipped and standing tall, like it knew we were both leaving something behind. The floors groaned under my steps as I made my way through the dim hallway. These old beach homes always had floors like that, honest in their age, unwilling to let you pass unnoticed. But I didn't care if the wood creaked. I wasn't hiding anymore. In the kitchen, with the hum of the refrigerator for company, I folded a note in half, then again, and tucked it under the salt shaker. Handled what I needed. No further responses required. I didn't write it to be cruel. I wrote it because it was true. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't look back. The ride to the airport was soft, muted. I said nothing to the driver, except, "Thank you," when he picked up my bag. He offered to avoid traffic. I told him the scenic route was fine. Let the coastline pass. Let the waves do their thing, crashing and retreating. Always busy, never still. I watched the ocean from the passenger seat and let it become a metaphor I didn't need to name. At the terminal, I sipped lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. I opened my phone and tapped a folder tucked neatly into my email inbox. Proof no one asked for. Inside, screenshots, every receipt, every flight, every dinner reservation, every spa booking, each one bearing my name, while their photos got the tags, the likes, the compliments. While I stood just outside the frame, holding the phone, holding the plan, holding everything together. I didn't open the photos. I didn't need to relive it. Just seeing the folder was enough. It was real. It happened. I hadn't imagined the labor. I just finally decided not to volunteer it anymore. Somewhere over Mississippi, while my plane hummed toward Dallas, things started to unravel behind me. Vera tried to check out of the resort. Her card declined. She tried again. Declined. Callista, likely mid-brunch, attempting to order vegan groceries from her phone, got an access-denied message she'd never seen before. Declan's phone buzzed with a failed car rental notification. The wheels, so used to turning without question, were locking in place. The family's shared car dance, funded by me, maintained by me, protected by me, was frozen. By the time we landed, my phone was vibrating with the fallout. I turned it on at baggage claim. The screen lit up with a storm of notifications. Vera, what did you do? Callista, we're stuck. This is not funny. Vera again. Is this your idea of revenge? Callista, we can't even call an Uber. Fix it. Now. I didn't respond. I read them carefully, as if I were reading news about strangers. Then, without any anger, I tapped delete thread. No fireworks. No sense of triumph. Just wait, shifting, space, clearing, peace, blooming. In the terminal lounge waiting for my connecting flight, I opened the Notes app and began typing. My fingers didn't hesitate. I was never the problem. I was the platform. And I finally stepped off. I sat back, breathing in the strange calm of release, of no longer being available, of no longer playing a role I didn't audition for. A flight attendant walked past and offered me water. I took it, nodded, not in smugness, in stillness. I didn't think about Vera pacing, or Callista sending frantic messages, or Declan trying to keep the peace when he never once kept me safe. I didn't picture them. I pictured myself. A self untethered, unburdened. A self no longer writing the script for people who never gave her a speaking part. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even payback. It was a reset. The kind that doesn't come with a dramatic soundtrack, but with a quiet exhale. The kind where you don't slam the door, you remove the hinges entirely. Before I powered my phone down for the next leg of the flight, I checked one last screen. Family shared card status, permanently closed. No reactivation available, no appeals, just done. A few hours later, the sun dipped behind unfamiliar clouds as my new flight descended into a city I hadn't planned on, but had chosen. They'd booked round-trip tickets, assuming I'd return with them. But I wasn't on their itinerary anymore. For the first time, I was finally, on my own. The first morning back in Denver greeted me with a silence I didn't expect to find comforting. No vibrating phones tossed on countertops. No group texts buzzing with passive-aggressive emojis. No color-coded lists stuck to the fridge with cutesy magnets shaped like avocados. Just quiet. Real, living quiet. The sun cut soft gold across my kitchen, pouring through the gauzy curtains I had hung without anyone's opinion. I was barefoot in my favorite robe, the one with the stitched initials that no longer felt ironic. The scent of strong black coffee curled into the air, brewed in the machine I bought, maintained, and like most things in my life, now cleaned myself. I didn't expect a knock on the door. I wasn't waiting for an apology wrapped in flowers, or a voicemail with just the right inflection of remorse. But my phone still lit up, as if the past was reaching its hand under the door. 47 new messages. At the top of the screen, a notification from a group chat I hadn't seen since the week everything broke apart. Group name changed, Family Healing. I wasn't in the group. There was no invitation, just a quiet exclusion that somehow still spoke volumes. They weren't asking me back. They were building a new narrative, one I wasn't welcome in, but also no longer needed to be. Vera's voice filled my voicemail next. "We didn't raise you to be cold," she began, like that one sentence would pull me back into orbit, as if that was the final word on what love should look like. I didn't listen past that. I didn't need to. I pressed delete without saving, without replaying. Closure, I had finally learned, wasn't something they were ever going to offer, but I had stopped asking for it. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk, staring at a folder on my desktop titled, "Closure is Mine Now." It wasn't poetic when I named it, just functional. Inside were the remnants of war, screenshots of texts they thought I hadn't seen, call logs that proved their absences, bank statements tied to my stolen contributions, the voice memo from that night in the kitchen when my father's words slipped out unfiltered, and of course, that one photo from the party. The one where I was labeled as an unidentified guest. I hovered my mouse over the folder. I didn't need to reopen it. I already knew what was inside. I'd memorized it like a tragic monologue. But something shifted in me that day. Not vengeance, not even sadness, just clarity. I highlighted every file, right-clicked, renamed the folder, archived, no longer active. I sat back in my chair and let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. There was a time when I would have hesitated, afraid that letting go meant giving them permission to rewrite history. But it wasn't erasure. It was release. Those files were no longer evidence. They were echoes. And I didn't need echoes to tell my story anymore. A few days later, I wandered into a tucked-away bookstore Kath had never noticed before, nestled between an antique shop and a used record store. It had dusty corners and handwritten chalkboard menus, the kind of place you don't find unless you're lost or finally free. I ordered a strong black coffee and chose a seat by the window, where the sunlight spilled like warm silk across the table. The barista, a girl in her 20s with glitter on her eyelids, handed me my cup and tilted her head. "I love your earrings," she said. "They look like they mean something." I reached up and touched the tiny silver moons dangling from my ear Sones had found at a flea market in Santa Fe 2 years ago. I hadn't worn them in ages. "They do," I said, and smiled. Not for her approval, not because I needed to charm anyone, but because they did mean something, just not to anyone but me. Near the front register, I spotted a stand with travel brochures. One caught my eye: Solo Women's Hiking Retreat, Zion National Park. I flipped it open, heart oddly steady. I read the details, then read them again. The wind whistled slightly outside the cafe door, brushing a fallen leaf past my boot. I took out my phone, scanned the QR code, and registered. There was no need to tell anyone. No need to justify the cost, ask for time off, or seek permission. It was my name, my card, my decision, and that was the most radical thing of all. On my way out, I passed a family sitting outside. A little girl leaned into her mother's lap, giggling, while her mom gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I watched them for a moment, not with bitterness, not even with longing. It wasn't envy I felt. It was recognition, the quiet kind you get when you remember wanting something that no longer fits. Like a coat you wore for years, until one day you shrug it off and realize it was never your color. Some families inherit peace. Others, like me, learn how to build it with their own 2 hands, on new ground, under no one's shadow. And sometimes that's the only kind that truly lasts. They say silence can be cruel, but sometimes it's where you find the clearest truth. For me, it wasn't about walking away in anger. It was about walking away with intention. When you've spent your life being the one who shows up, who smooths the wrinkles, who fills the gaps no one sees, there comes a time when you ask, who's showing up for me? I learned that setting boundaries doesn't make you cold, it makes you honest. And if honesty makes others uncomfortable, maybe it's because they've benefited from your silence for too long. Family, in its healthiest form, should be a place where your presence is not just tolerated, but cherished. If that's not the case, it's not betrayal to protect your peace. It's self-respect. Maybe you've been the invisible one at the table. Maybe your kindness has been turned into currency, your silence mistaken for consent. If so, this story was for you. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose your own peace over your family's approval? Have you ever walked away not because you stopped caring, but because you finally cared about yourself? Let's talk about it. Drop a comment below, just type 1 if this story hit home for you, or tell me what city you're watching from. If it didn't resonate, I'd still love to hear why this space is for every voice. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and rooted in truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your voice matters here, and I'll be right here, with the next story that just might feel a little too familiar.